Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. This is the second episode in the Shakedown series dealing with the blogs that I wrote on Shakedown title, and this one was written the very next day after the Sermon on the Porch analysis, August 19th, and already the sort of plot was thickening as people started seeing some of the minutiae, some of the details in the Sermon on the Porch. One example being, was that a scratch on Chris Watts' neck? Now, some in the true crime community, or even those not interested in true crime, might have looked at this particular thing and said, wow, you're really reaching, you're seeing things that you want to see, it's irrelevant, it's insignificant. And yet this did actually come up in the discovery, and I'm going to go to that right now. It's page 73, so fairly early on in the discovery. It's from a report by Officer James, and what he said was, and all of this is around the context when Chris Watts was actually being arrested. So his father had just been taken to an area of hotels near Firestone Boulevard. That was at about 8:15 on the 15th, so on the Wednesday. And so it was really the very next day, after the Sermon on the Porch. And then at 10:05, Officer James said, I took photos of Chris while he was in the interview room at the Frederick Police Department. The photos I took of him with his shirt off, his hands, head, neck, and face. There was a red mark on the left side of his neck that he identified as being a mosquito bite. There was also a red mark on the front of his neck. I did not observe any other obvious signs of injury to Chris's body. So what I think is pretty incredible there is, even today, so even 3 years after the fact, we are not aware of any injuries that Chris Watts sustained besides this particular red mark on the side of his neck. And that was the sort of enduring mystery of the case at the time, and to some extent to the present. How did Chris Watts commit the crime against Shanann without her fighting back? Why did Shanann have no defensive wounds? Not none, because we found out she did have some, but almost none. Why were there no defensive wounds? And that is something you tend to find in a lot of crimes. Marks on hands, bruises, and so on. And so it turned out that this observation, as early as the 19th, was something that was being seen, observed, basically 2 days earlier in the Frederick Police Department, in the interrogation cubicle where they actually photographed him. So it shows that the true crime community can deliver, right? And one wonders whether they observe some of the things that are said by certain channels, and it would later turn out that they did, because correspondence regarding Shakedown, and that's going to be the very next episode, correspondence regarding a link to a particular blog post actually passed between Kobach and Kessinger. And so it does show that when you hitting on something that is certainly relevant, it does come up. Everybody Googles. You may Google, you may look online for what you're looking for. Well, so do the police, so do perpetrators. So do suspects, so do mistresses. And all of this came from just paying attention in the Sermon on the Porch to Chris Watts's appearance, to his skin, forgetting about what he was saying, just looking at what one could see. And so just above the end of his shirt, not the collar, I guess the edge of his shirt around the neck, there's that little mark, right? And so what I mentioned in the blog post, I said he's faced away from the camera. At that point, I actually assumed that there was more than one camera, and I'm not sure, video camera, I'm not sure if there was at that point. I don't think the Sermon on the Porch was filmed by more than one camera crew. I think it was just Denver 7. And then Denver 7 changed their camera angle sort of halfway through. And something else I just pointed out there was him saying, it's earth-shattering, like a nightmare that I can't wake up from. And just saying that earth-shattering is a colorful term. It's something that stood out to me. And I was saying that Watts volunteers this, but it's a semantic Freudian slip because he's buried his wife. Now, at that point, we hadn't actually seen Shanann's grave. We hadn't seen pictures of it. Just that we knew that she was buried at the well site. And so, I mean, quite early on, you could link those terms. But just coming back to looking at that mark, from some perspectives, it looks like it could be a bite wound. It looks slightly like a U shape or almost a V shape. On the other hand, it does look like it's kind of a 7 shape. It's got a horizontal area that is kind of inflamed, and then it's got I wouldn't say a vertical area, but a area that's at a different angle that is a slightly different level of inflammation. But that does look like an injury, and it does look like the scratch of a nail, right? Possibly that Shanann scratched Watts's neck, and then possibly the hand was caught, and that might account for the downward part of it. The fact is that Shanann had very long fingernails, and so it would be likely that this would happen. Of course, if you're making that claim, then you could say, well, did they find anything under her fingernails, right? Did they find Watts's skin under her fingernails? And of course they didn't. And so you would either then say, so did that not happen, or was Shanann cleaned in some way? In other words, was she put in the shower like Travis Alexander was? Was she cleaned in some way? In other words, him cleaning himself off her, kind of thing. Did he possibly wash her hands? There is still the possibility that injury is innocent, that it could have been from something else. I don't think it looks anything like a mosquito bite. It looks more like an abrasion. It's difficult to say for sure. But what is interesting in this particular case is that it evoked for me Amanda Knox. Just before I get to that, something that I pointed out in the blog post was Watts kind of instinctively sort of lifting his hand to where that mark was. And that's something that I've thought for quite a long time, was that he seemed to be absently or reflexively touching that injury or whatever. And I don't think that was actually the case. I think he was actually just, he had a mic there. There was a mic placed on that part of his shirt, and he was simply just removing the mic. And you don't really notice the microphone because the microphone is black and his shirt is sort of mottled or speckled, black and grey. And so although it's right there, you don't necessarily notice the microphone. Something else that I mentioned in the blog post was that I believe that Shanann's death was a silent death, meaning strangulation. Of course, at that point, we didn't know it. We didn't know it being the public. But Watts had just admitted it, 2 or 3 days earlier in a confession. He'd admitted choking her and strangling her. He sort of used alternative terms to his father and then to law enforcement. So basically, within a very short time, we were sort of aware of this, or certainly suspected it. Again, bear in mind the autopsy results were still pending. I don't think the affidavit had been released at that point. And what we are doing in this isn't kind of just rehashing everything for the sake of it. We are trying to look at what we knew and what we didn't know. What we knew given the information, and what ultimately was facts and evidence and truth that law enforcement were actioning on and taking action on. So at the end of that particular blog post, I referred to a crime scene image of Amanda Knox. You don't often see it. It's quite a long blemish, similar to the one that you see on Chris Watts's neck, which I think in itself is quite interesting. It's a similar discoloration. It's a similar kind of injury. In this case, it's a vertical one, quite a long one. And what is quite incredible with the Amanda Knox case is you can actually see that injury in some of the photos taken minutes after Meredith Kercher was found. You can actually see that injury on Amanda Knox's throat and neck. On some images it's a lot clearer than others, but you have certain things sometimes in a crime that are right there. They're right there in front of you, and because they are so obvious, you almost don't know what to do with them. You don't know whether it's a smoking gun or whether it's absolutely normal. And I think affect is one of those things where someone just doesn't behave right, and it's obvious, but you don't know really what it means. There are a lot of things like that in true crime where you are seeing something and it's all about interpretation. I just watched a video recently where someone had just escaped from prison, and was pretending to be a jogger, and the policeman was actually on the phone trying to find out what was this guy's eye color, what is his age, and all of that kind of thing. Meanwhile, the prisoner, and this guy was the prisoner, was just sort of playing along with it, acting casual. But here you have a situation where the guy had literally escaped from prison. There he was, the police had found him, and he managed to fool them. And that's the game that is often played in these true crime cases, is you've got the person, now interpret the evidence. Are you able to do that? So I provided a little bit of analogy between Knox and Chris Watts. I don't know if they could be more different, other than that they're both somewhat socially awkward. Watts in an introverted way, Knox in kind of an extroverted way. And so the other thing that I think's interesting is I disabled comments for this particular blog post, and I think that may have been the first time I'd ever done that. I think it was the first time I'd ever disabled comments on a blog post, and this particular site, I think, was quite a few years old. It was certainly up and running when the Oscar Pistorius case was happening, so in 5 years, right? And the irony is that there have basically been two cases where the vitriol, just the level of public scorn and backbiting and I don't know, whatever you want to call it, just nastiness. I wasn't to know it at this point, but it was certainly a warning, was that you're going to get cancel culture in a big way in the Chris Watts case. If people didn't like what you were saying about Shanann, then they went after you, and you were victim blaming and you were a misogynist and all that kind of thing. And I think in a way all of that was just symptomatic of the attention that this case was getting, just how high profile it was. But I've also got to say, I don't think there's another case besides the Amanda Knox case. There was also a lot of vitriol, very angry people associated with that case, and cancel culture folks associated with that case. Besides that case, I don't think I've ever had a case with as much people pursuing you and trying to cancel you, and just this incredibly dark side to just what seemed like a fairly ordinary, straightforward, high-profile case. A father, I mean straightforward in everybody knew who did it, kind of thing, or supposedly. And so yeah, it was just quite shocking, just the level of emotion that was part of this particular case. And so this was an early warning, the locking of, or the disabling of comments of this particular blog post, just the second one, just the second blog post on it. So interestingly, the very next day, there was a journalist named Zora Stevenson. She was being asked, for opinion on Chris Watts, right? Do you think he's guilty and all of that kind of thing? And she made a statement saying what she felt about the whole thing. I'm going to play it in a second. But I think what you've got to bear in mind is a journalist, if they do express their opinion, so let's say she'd said Chris Watts is definitely guilty, and then there was a trial and they failed to prove that, then not only could she but also the media outlet could be sued. And that is why journalists need to maintain a neutrality. Is they've got to report on facts and not more than that. If they do prognosticate, it's also got to be fact-based and reasonable under the circumstances. But let's listen into what Zora Stevenson says about her interview with Chris Watts.
I have no inclination of where she is.
Now, all week, people have asked me about my thoughts on that interview, and my answer to that question is this. As a journalist, we have to give up the right to have a public opinion about things. I knocked on that door Tuesday and approached the interview like I do every single day, with compassion. I let that man tell his story. It's not my job to judge. I am observant, yes, but judgmental, never. Every week I interview people going through hard times or what seems like hard times. What I'm not used to, though, is standing in someone's house, shaking their hand to find out that 2 days later, that same person would be arrested for the murder of his wife and kids. And while that interview is now ingrained in my head in the worst possible way, it's nothing compared to what the town of Frederick is going through right now, and definitely not comparable to how the friends and family of Shanann, Bella, and Celeste feel right now.
In the next episode in the series, we'll deal with the blog post posted on August the 20th on Shakedown title. It is titled, Chris Watts, It's Time to Talk About Why. And we're going to talk about whether that was too early and talk about what we decided that early, how much was ultimately correct. Bearing in mind, you are not going to get this question either, it might be asked, but certainly not going to be answered in the media. So if you've enjoyed the content so far on this channel on the Chris Watts case, and you're looking forward to additional coverage on the Shakedown blogs, it's a new series, then please subscribe to the channel, like, share, leave a comment, and I'll see you guys next time.